From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi listeners, Jason here. After a break over Christmas, the Psych Health and Safety Podcast is back. To start the year, we're bringing you 2 episodes recorded live at PHSCON 2025. The first episode features none other than New York Times best-selling author and organisational psychologist Adam Grant, where we discuss how to make work not suck. Tune in to the next episode where we talk to Professor Rob Briner about evidence-based practice for mental health at work. Like what you hear? Then get to PHSCON 2026 in Sydney on 8th to 9th September for the largest community event in Australia for psychosocial safety at work. We're looking forward to the year ahead. Now, on to this episode.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
Well, I slept last night, so that's a plus.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, nice.
Everything went really well yesterday. Nothing was going to go wrong today. It was fine.
Sure.
Yeah. But it was an eventful day yesterday, right?
It was, yes, in many ways.
Yeah, as people can see from the front of the room, poor Heather broke an ankle.
Broken ankle, yeah.
You know, so, but she's in good spirits, as you can see, and she's been able to make it today, so.
Sure, she was really hoping that you'd call her out in front of everybody like this.
I know she loves it.
She loves being the centre of attention, Heather.
Yeah.
Such a drama queen.
Just broken ankle, far out.
Wow.
Yeah, what did Merrick say last night? Take a shot of concrete? Yeah, no. Come on, Heather. No, we appreciate you, Heather. Yeah. Anything else happened yesterday overnight?
Aside from day one of our conference.
That little thing, yeah.
That little thing.
Yeah, that went all right.
Probably lots of things of note, yeah.
Yeah. Merrick went well, Jimmy Reese went well, PHSCON, we now know how to pronounce this. So,
oh, okay. Is that it?
Well, that's what he said. So,
right.
Yeah, so.
Yes.
And we found out heaps more ways to spend $2,200 and going to a conference as well. So next time, think about how you spend your money, everyone. So. All right, well, our guest has been patiently waiting for about half an hour, I think, so we should probably get him on. You reckon?
I reckon.
You reckon? Well, I should probably bring up his intro then, shouldn't I? Yeah. I'm so well organised today.
It's okay.
This is how we do it in podcast land.
We'll edit it out.
We'll edit it out in post. No one will know. Okay, so an organisational psychologist, this guest rethinks how people lead, work and live. He has been Wharton's top-rated professor for 7 straight years, and his pioneering research has inspired people to question assumptions about motivation, generosity and creativity. He is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of 6 books that have sold millions of copies. His TED Talks have over 35 million views. His podcasts, Work Life and Rethinking, have topped the charts. He's been recognised as one of the world's 10 most influential management thinkers. A very warm welcome to the podcast, Adam Grant. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back down under. Thrilled to be here.
So I believe this is probably your preferred way to travel to Australia. I heard you were quite jet lagged last time you came over.
You know what? This is the easiest way, but I have to say flying to Australia is much easier than flying to Europe.
Well, it's great to have you. I want to clear up something because we've been trying for 4 years to get you on the podcast. Not very hard, admittedly. I mean, we've just been like, when we've been doing our podcast, we're like, Adam, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on. Just reach out. But is that how you got on our podcast? Did you hear us ask you to come on?
I wish I could say yes to that, but the truth is this just showed up on my calendar one day. No idea how it got here.
Okay, well, case closed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing worked.
Yeah, so, all right. Well, I probably listened to more of your podcasts then than you of mine, but that's all right. You can catch up. We've got over 200 episodes, so.
We won't take it personally.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam.
So, Adam, the first question that we always ask all of our guests is, could you please tell us about your professional career?
Yes. What's your next question?
Would you please?
I will. Yeah, when I was in uni, I took an organizational psychology class, and I was just fascinated by the idea that somebody like me who didn't have the patience to do individual therapy and was interested in, trying to solve challenges with everyday human behavior and motivation as opposed to clinical problems, might have a place in the world. And I love the fact that, this was a whole field that would dive into interesting workplaces and jobs and figure out how to make work suck less. And I decided I wanted that to be my profession. So went to grad school, did a doctorate, and then in between had managed a team and spent all my time thinking about how could I have done a better job hiring and motivating people. And basically decided to make that my focus post grad school. So ended up doing a lot of teaching and research, and then said, okay, what I want to do is I want to immerse myself in the most interesting workplaces on earth and figure out what the rest of us can learn from them. And my goal was basically to think about organizational psychology the same way that you might think about getting workout tips from an Olympic athlete. You might not follow all of them, but chances are they're doing something really effective that might help you with your exercise regimen. So I went to Pixar to try to understand creativity. I went to the military to understand team cohesion. I spent time in the NBA with basketball coaches trying to figure out how to help people realize their potential. And I guess all that brought me to here. I've been writing books and podcasting and continuing the research and speaking. And I can't believe that this is my job, because I get to wake up every day and ask, what do I want to study today and who do I want to learn from?
Adam, I think that Work Life was actually the first ever podcast that I ever listened to, which was recommended to me by an inspector that I was working with at the time. So that probably means
Honored.
nothing to you, but...
No, we never know who's out there listening. You get general numbers, right? But you don't know who the faces and voices are, and you don't have a real sense of what the impact is. And I think there are other podcasts that you could have listened to that might have been more riveting, but I hope you got something useful out of it.
Well, there's a few hundred people in the room today. Anyone listen to any of Adam Grant's podcasts before, Work Life or Rethinking? Stage lights are up, but I'd say, taking a quick poll, 60%, I reckon. Yeah, it's not bad. Everyone else, get on Apple or Spotify and listen. We'll increase your numbers for you, Adam, don't worry about that. Watch the big spike that you get in listenership after this conference.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. So on our podcast, the Psych, Health and Safety podcast, trademark pending, we typically focus on topics relating to creating work that doesn't harm people's mental health and gives them the opportunity to thrive. What observations can you share of the interests US companies have in creating better mental health outcomes for employees? And I believe the tides might be shifting a little bit too, potentially, over there.
Yeah, I think in the US, what we've seen is basically in the last 5 years, a huge wake-up call that mental health matters. I think before the pandemic, most American companies basically treated psychological challenges as problems to be ignored, and problems to, if they were dealt with, to be dealt with on an individual basis. And all of a sudden, COVID happened, and a lot of leaders realized, you know what, we have a huge impact on people's mental health and well-being. We need to think about how we design our jobs and how we shape our cultures and how we interact with our people to not only minimize harm, but actually try to unleash better mental health. And I think that unfortunately, the past year or so has seen a little bit of a backslide. I'd like to have better data to be able to weigh in, more concretely on that. But just tracking, some of the survey data that I've collected, and also the feedback that's rolling in from readers and listeners, a lot of people feel like mental health and well-being are no longer a priority. And some of that is a natural pendulum swing. We know that when there's slack capacity, when the economy is booming, employees' concerns have always taken greater prominence. And then, during times of recession or turmoil or turbulence, sometimes, these things that we all care about take a little bit of a backseat. So I think some of that shift is natural given the state of uncertainty in the world and some of the pressures that leaders are under. I think it's incredibly short-sighted though, because we know in the long run, investing in people and taking care of people is a massive competitive advantage. And so I think that the leaders who are deprioritizing mental health concerns are probably shooting themselves in the foot in terms of their ability to attract and motivate and retain a talented workforce.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Agreed, yes.
Yeah.
Adam, how do you view the role of employee benefits, which are really, an individual level intervention compared to a work design approach, which is more of a systemic intervention as a means of improving mental health outcomes?
So I don't want to diminish or dismiss the importance of individual benefits, but they are sort of like basic nutrients. They're table stakes. We expect them to be there, but they're not enough. I think the evidence on work design is extremely strong, and my colleague Sharon Parker, who's in your neck of the woods, has shown very clearly that the basic work design choices that leaders and managers make around autonomy, giving people discretion to influence what they work on and who they work with and when they work, and also giving people a voice, giving them a chance to have a say in the quality of their work experience and how their time is spent. Those opportunities have a huge impact on the quality of people's lives at work and actually the quality of their lives more broadly. And so I think any leader or manager who says, but wait, we've got like a great pay and benefits package, so we've got your back, I think is probably missing what actually affects people's day-to-day experience the most, which is what they do and how they're treated.
Yep, definitely.
I'm interested, Adam, on that. Did you read William Fleming's research where he was looking at the limitations of individual interventions? I know I got quite a bit of run over there in the popular press.
Is this a pop quiz? I actually haven't. I'm curious to hear more. Tell me.
So it was cross-sectional, the data that he was looking at, but it was a huge data set from a wellbeing company over in the UK. I think there was about 50,000 people, and they looked at about 20 different individual level interventions. And out of 20 of them, only one of them actually seemed to have any sort of meaningful impact at scale on people's wellbeing at work, and that was volunteering. So basically he surmised we need to focus more on systems rather than individual interventions if we really want to move the dial. And a lot of that is because of the voluntary nature of individual interventions. If you're really relying on people to practice better self-care but in a toxic work environment, how much can you expect that to actually help?
Very well put. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I don't find it at all surprising. I think, if you look at the meta-analytic evidence that's been gathered over decades, what seems to matter most for the quality of people's experience at work is basically three things. Number one, how their jobs are designed. Are they meaningful and motivating, or are they depleting and exhausting? Number two, how they're treated by the people around them, especially their direct supervisor. And number three, what the broader culture is like. And you mentioned toxicity. I love the Donald Sull work on toxic culture, which shows that there are 5 markers that you can actually track and measure. And the telltale signs of toxicity will not surprise anyone, but the quantification of them to say, hey, these are going to predict turnover and retention, maybe as much as 10 times more strongly as how well people are paid. That's kind of a staggering result. So when I think about toxic cultures, the markers that stand out are, number one, being treated disrespectfully. Number two, being excluded. Number three, being the target of some kind of abuse. Number four, being subjected to cutthroat competition. And number five, rampant unethical behavior. Like if we could just root that out, we could dramatically improve people's experiences at work. And I think, in general, bad is stronger than good. So as much as I would love every leader and manager to be caring, to be generous, to be, off the charts respectful of people's dignity, to be extra inclusive, just getting rid of the bad behavior, I think, is probably where our greatest impact lies, and frankly, our lowest hanging fruit as well, because empirically, it's a small number of bad apples who spoil the barrel for everyone else.
Yeah, that's probably a good segue into what I wanted to ask next, because I want to talk more about the role of leaders and maybe overcoming or rethinking, if you like, some of their lived experiences from maybe when they first started their careers, because they all like to think about, the long hours and everything that they used to do. I'm going to share up I know you like Workplace Chronicles. I see you post or repost some of their stuff on LinkedIn. I love it as well. Lots of good org site references in there. But the question is, it's quite common for us to come across leaders who remember the significant work demands they dealt with when first starting in their industry, and they expect junior workers to have the same experience, right? Like trial by fire. So they summed it up really well. I'm not sure if we can get that up there. Might have to take Adam off screen and put up see if the AV guys are onto it. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe I need to just summarize what it says. Oh, this would have worked really well, guys. It's like, but probably not bombing as bad as, hey, that's better than Jimmy Reese's technician trying to find a LinkedIn profile. So what I'm showing on screen, I don't think you can see it, Adam, but it's 4 panels, as Work Chronicles often is. It says, the leader says, back in the day, I worked 18 hours as a junior, so make sure juniors are putting in the same effort. And then the people say, or we could avoid repeating history and spare them unnecessary suffering. And then the leader says, but then how will I justify my overworked past, right? So if you caught that, not sure how it's relayed in verbal form versus imagery, but yeah, how could leaders who've had this traumatic experience and think, this is how people have to come up, this is how they prove themselves, how do they rethink that and go, well, actually, let's just not harm people?
That's a really good question. I think the conversation that I'd want to have with leaders would pick up exactly where you left off, which is to say, if you could go back and redo your work experience and design it differently, what would you change? And I'm guessing a lot of them would say, we don't need hazing rituals. Right? We don't need to be subjected to unnecessary adversity, just to prove our character, or worse yet, to build our character. Work life is full of enough natural, unforeseen adversity anyway. So let's not subject people to it more than they're going to face, beyond their control anyway. I think for that conversation, I'd then say, look, there's a temptation to justify the past. In psychology, we all know this is cognitive dissonance, right? There's a tension between, wait, on the one hand, I went through something awful. On the other hand, I realized that maybe I didn't have to go through that. And the way that I resolve that tension is to convince myself that, well, I grew through that. That was a formative experience for me. And I think once you realize that dissonance reduction pressure exists, it's a little bit easier to catch yourself falling into the trap and then avoid it. I think it's also worth talking with leaders a little bit about their impact and their legacies. So I think that a lot of leaders are basically trying to be good custodians of the past. And I think that's a mistake. I think leadership is about being a good steward of the future, which means it's much more important to take good care of your successors than it is to maintain fidelity to your predecessors. There's a meme that I love from this. It's about tradition. The meme says, tradition is peer pressure from dead people. And I think there's something to be said for that, right? The leaders that we all worked under may still be alive, but the pressure they're continuing to exert on us is no longer relevant to the present and the future. And so I think that's a conversation worth having. If you hadn't gone through this, how would you design work differently? What kind of experience do you want your kids to go through? I'll just say one other thing on that. I worked with an investment bank years ago that all of a sudden, after years and years of just unreasonably long hours and stressful demands on people, finally senior leadership kind of woke up and said, we need to do a better job. And I asked them why. What made you rethink the way that you're managing people? And on the surface, the initial answers were, well, we used to be kind of cream of the crop. We were the place to work. And now we're losing talent to tech and private equity and startups. And so we've got to do something to stay competitive. And then I pushed a little bit further and said, yeah, but that's not totally new. And you can still recruit many, many, many good people. What's really going on here? And I found out that all of the leaders at the firm had kids who had recently graduated from college. And they saw the misery their own children were being put through. And all of a sudden said, this has to stop. We have to break this cycle. And I do think there's something to be said for imagining what kind of world of work do you want your own children and their children to experience? And maybe that's a reason to change.
That's a great story. Yeah, I think in safety we also often talk about the big five. What are the 5 things that you want to go home for? Why do you want to be safe at work? And family is always one of the biggest ones, right? I don't want to lose my life, or I don't want to injure myself to a point that I'm not going to be able to participate with my family anymore. So I think thinking about the impact on one's family is a good way to maybe get people to rethink. Like, would you like your kids to do what you're doing or like to be exposed to what you're doing to your staff?
Agreed.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that, I don't know, like, do you get past a certain volume of employees and you just can't sort of think of them as people anymore or something?
We do see a tendency of leaders as they gain more power and status, as they become more distant from their people, as they have larger spans of control, to dehumanize their employees a little bit. And I think that there are some ways to counteract that tendency. There's an incredible Danish study of roughly 10,000 CEOs in Denmark, showing that if they have a daughter, they actually then start to pay their employees better. And there's something about having a child, a female child, that activates some basic empathy that was missing before. There's also evidence, this is Emily Bianchi's research, showing that if you start your career in a recession, decades later, when you become the boss, you are less narcissistic and less entitled, because you know what it's like to struggle professionally. And you want to make sure that you can change that situation for the next generation. So I'm not suggesting that we should engineer recessions necessarily, but when the economy is in flux, I think there sometimes is a silver lining there, which is we do raise a generation of leaders who are more likely to be servant leaders and feel a sense of responsibility. And I think that's something we want to try to cultivate.
Great bosses.
Yeah, okay. And I've got 2 daughters. Many of you would have seen my daughter walking around, or my 2 daughters walking around yesterday. When I said that we're going to have Jimmy Reese, he's a well-loved Australian comedian. You wouldn't have heard of him. But when I said that he's going to be here, my wife said, I'm bringing my kids, or our kids.
That was interesting.
Yeah, maybe as a slip of her
Interesting choice of words there, yeah.
I think a lot of people could see the other spitting image of me, so unfortunately for them. So I think it's your question, isn't it?
It is my question.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to say something else.
No.
Halfway, no, you finished. Okay.
Adam's a really good lecturer. He wants to keep us on topic.
Okay,
so, yeah.
good. Adam, employers obviously do want, maybe not obviously, but they say that they want high-performing teams and individuals working for them. How can they balance that desire or drive along with protecting employees from burnout?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a false dichotomy, isn't it? Because if you burn people out, in the long run, you don't sustain high performance. So I think we need to stretch the time horizon out long enough that we say, look, burnout is a recipe for undermining people's, both will and skill to contribute. I think obviously that breaks down when we start to think about the short run. And I think what we know about burnout is that it's caused by excessive job demands coupled with a lack of control and support. And so the starting point there is to say, let's not just measure the volume of work. Let's really think about the quality of work that people do. And if you're either forcing them to do long hours or just giving them an unreasonable amount of work, you may find that they're able to maintain their output. And ultimately, though, there's a cost when it comes to they make more errors or they end up, just doing work that's less creative. So, let's start there. There's what we get in quantity, we often lose in quality. I think Cal Newport did a really good job on that in his book, Slow Productivity, where he mapped out what it looks like to be accomplished without burning out. I think then what we also need to do is we really need to think about the control and support factors that we build in. One of the best things I saw a few years ago was a manager who said to a team, look, it's okay to call in sick. It's also okay to call in sad. And what I thought was genius about that was not the idea that we're going to give you 5 sad days a year, and if you don't use them by the end of the year, then HR is going to take them away. No. What I loved about it was the idea of normalizing mental health as part of the overall health equation. And telling people, look, the same way that, if you broke your ankle or if you got the flu, we would expect you to take care of yourself. If you are struggling with depression or anxiety or burnout, we want you to take some time. And I think it's nice for managers to say that, but sometimes it's just lip service. What really counts is when leaders actually model it. When you see a manager announce to a team, hey, I'm taking a mental health day, or I'm taking a recharge week, right? That normalizes the behavior for everyone else and signals that it's not only legitimate to do it, it's actually encouraged.
So what are some other systemic challenges organisations face when trying to balance high performance and positive mental well-being? How can these be overcome? And I think, there's that thinking you can have one or the other, right? High performance or well-being.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we ought to do is really think more broadly about what it means to be an effective performer. So I'll go to Sharon Parker and Mark Griffin here. Again, they did a great job breaking down performance and saying, most of us just think about performance as task proficiency. Are you delivering on the expectations of your role? But there are 2 other kinds of performance that really matter and that require extra energy, basically. One is adaptivity. Are you responding effectively to change and uncertainty? And the other is proactivity. Are you initiating change? And I think what you see pretty quickly is that when people burn out, they maintain their task proficiency, right? They do the core things that are in their job description effectively. But what falls by the wayside is their ability to adapt to change and initiate change. People will protect the narrowest parts of their job descriptions first and foremost. But I don't think in a turbulent world we can afford to lose the adaptivity and proactivity. Because ultimately, when I think about performance, we used to measure your potential to be a star performer in the future by looking at your ability. And increasingly today, we're looking at it in terms of agility. Well, last I checked, your agility is a function of how well you adapt to change and how well you initiate change. And so I think there's a real risk that if you burn people out, they will continue to do what looks like performance, but ultimately not add value in the ways that organizations rely on it most. The other element of this in the Griffin, Neal, and Parker framework is you can overlay that proficiency, adaptivity, proactivity distinction on kind of individual versus team versus organizational contributions. And again, what we see is when people start to get depleted, they will often do their individual tasks well, but they stop helping others. They stop looking out for the organization and the broader mission. And then you end up basically with a bunch of people who are doing solid individual work, but the whole is no greater than the sum of its parts. And I don't want to lose that collaboration either. So that would be my case for making sure we maintain the well-being, for people to collaborate, for them to innovate, for them to ultimately do what's in the long-term best interests of their employer, not just what allows them to keep their job in the short term.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, Follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
We recognise that line managers often are kind of the person within the business who has the biggest opportunity to make a difference in the employee's experience of work. At last year's conference, we had Christina Maslach joining us for a recording, and she introduced us to the acronym GROSS, which is Get Rid of Stupid Stuff, and suggested that was something significant that line managers could do to improve work and reduce burnout. Do you have any other recommendations for line managers on steps that they could take to balance performance with burnout prevention, and preferably suggestions that don't require a degree in organisational or industrial psychology?
Well, I'll leave it to the pioneer who put burnout research on the map to tell us what's gross. I'll add a few things to what Christina put on the table. I think the first thing for me is something that I saw at a tomato paste plant. This was a tomato paste plant called Morningstar, which is hugely successful. They've generated hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, and they've never had a boss ever. They don't have a formal hierarchy. And I went to do a podcast there years ago because I wanted to understand, how do you even function without a traditional org chart? And they do a lot of things there that I would not recommend to anybody that I care about. But they do a bunch of things that I think are actually pretty generalizable. And my favorite one by far was, when you arrive there, you don't even know what your job is because you don't have a manager who assigned it to you. And the way that you figure out your role is you find out what your predecessor was doing, and then that becomes your job for the first year. At the end of year one, they invite you to reinvent your own job, to innovate in your own job description, to do what my colleagues Amy Raznesky and Jane Dutton first called job crafting, and be an active architect of your own tasks and interactions. The way they do that is they say you can basically reimagine your job in any way you want. But at the end of the day, you have to check two boxes. The first one is that you have to explain in writing, in a letter, how it's going to better advance our collective mission than what you were doing last year. So you have to show that your revised job is a contribution to the group, not just something that's going to serve you. And then secondly, you have to go to the 5 to 10 people that you are most interdependent with, and you have to convince them that this is a better version of your job. And if you can do that, you can redesign your own role. Well, think about that for a second. This is the kind of job crafting that can be done in any team, in any organization. We all have tasks that don't make sense for us. We all have strengths that we're not using in our jobs. What if we had a little bit of opportunity on the margin to make adjustments that would better align what we do every day with the value that we can add? Amy and Justin Berg and I actually tested this in a multinational tech company. We went and asked people to reimagine their own jobs and think about their tasks and interactions as flexible sets of building blocks. And also think about the skills they might need to build to try to make the adjustments they wanted to make. And 6 months later, they were every bit as effective as they'd been before, and their happiness had gone up. So they were basically able to improve their own jobs and their own experiences at work without jeopardizing their performance. If that doesn't show it's possible to align well-being and success, I don't know what does.
Yeah, interesting approach. Should we try it, Jason?
No. Sure. Sure. Why not? Let's put it to practice. Adam, those are all the questions that we had for you. Our audience has been putting questions into Menti while we've been talking. And I might just get our AV guys to put up the link again to Menti for those people who haven't done it or weren't quick enough earlier on to grab it. So grab your phones out, everyone. we'll get the Mincy code up, because I've only got 16 questions, and I'd love to see some more in there and more upvoted as well. We do have another about 30 minutes with Adam, so I'd love to get through as many of these questions as possible. But the first question we've got for you, Adam, from the audience is, what job design factors are important to have in environments where staff are consistently exposed to a lot of trauma? And I guess that's something that we've been talking, or it's something that is pretty relevant in Australia. We have regulations around the employer's duty to minimise harm to people both physically and psychologically, and trauma exposure is a big one. So yeah, what sort of job design factors could we think about to reduce the risk of harm when people are exposed to trauma? Because we can't eliminate first responder roles, for example.
No, you can't. Let me throw out two ideas on this. The first one is this is going to sound either trivial or unbelievable, but I assure you this has been replicated in many randomized controlled experiments, and it's a robust finding. After people are exposed to trauma, if you let them play Tetris, they are less likely to suffer from symptoms of PTSD. And the reason we think that happens is traumatic memories, they engage the visual system. And Tetris basically blocks the ability to encode what might be an upsetting or triggering set of visual cues into long-term memory. And so you're less likely to store it, you're less likely to retrieve it. Intrusive thoughts are less likely to happen a week or two later. It's likely that there are other interventions along with Tetris that work, but this is the one that's been tested the most. So I think we should all be playing more video games if we do work that exposes us to trauma. The other thing, which I think is much bigger, is there's a body of research I really liked. One of the most interesting studies was done by Tom Britt and his colleagues, which showed that oftentimes what allows people to cope with trauma is a sense that they're able to do something to lessen other people's suffering. So a lot of times what contributes to people's traumatic experiences is what's called empathic distress, which is often mislabeled as compassion fatigue. It's a misnomer because it's not actually compassion that drains people. It's not compassion that stresses people out. It's the experience of seeing other people hurting and feeling unable to help. The antidote to that kind of empathic distress is feeling that you make a difference, that you matter, that you're able to help other people. And I think many people who are exposed to frontline trauma do work that does make that difference, but they have no idea what the ultimate impact is. So think about, for example, emergency medical services responders or firefighters who save people's lives but have no follow-up afterward to know the lasting impact that they had. What I found in my research is when people are able to connect those dots and see the long-term contributions they've made to others' lives, it doesn't make traumatic events go away, but it makes them a little bit more bearable because you know how much your work carries meaning for other people. And so I think that if you were to ask about anyone who's exposed to trauma professionally, if their jobs didn't exist, who would be worse off? The groups of people that come to mind, you need to know their names and their faces and their stories because they are the reason why your work exists.
Some great advice and evidence-based. I like it.
All right, so next question for you, Adam. Organisational change and change fatigue are taking a large toll on employee wellbeing. What have you found really helps to support staff during these times?
I think the framing of change really matters. I think one of the reasons we see change fatigue is change is presented like a flavor of the month. There's all this all this marketing and branding and energy around it, and then the change happens and it either doesn't stick or it doesn't produce the intended benefits, and then people start to get discouraged and maybe even a little bit cynical because that process just rinses and repeats over and over again. What I think is missing from that conversation is to say, hey, listen, we are trying to build a learning organization. And the best way to learn is to run experiments. In fact, we need to be running experiments all the time, to be piloting new ideas, to be figuring out which old ideas we can actually discard because they're obsolete. And what that means is we're going to run a lot of experiments here. In some cases, you will be the lucky early beneficiary of a trial that is a smashing success. You're gonna be held up as a hero for having been part of it. We're going to try to then learn from your experience and spread it across the organization. In other cases, you will be the unlucky victim of a boneheaded idea that sounded really great on paper, but ultimately did not work in practice, or in some cases, didn't even get to the point where we thought it through on paper, but somebody was excited to test it. And we want to be the kind of place where ideas are tested as opposed to shot down. And if that happens, we want you to feel lucky that you were able to save other people from that terrible change by letting us know just how awful it was. And with this kind of frame, change is a little bit less terrifying, right? Because it's potentially temporary. Change is also something that we can look forward to as an experience that helps us all grow. And I don't know that that's the exact vocabulary I would recommend for every organization, but I think it's an example of the kind of frame that probably eliminates some of the change fatigue that we see and allows people to recognize that ongoing piloting and experimenting and testing and iterating is part of the process of growth. And if we're not doing it, then we're not evolving, we're stagnating.
Yeah, probably works where an organisation is being intentional with its change program.
Not just rolling things out.
Not just coming up with random ideas and making changes without thinking it through. Yeah.
Yeah, well-planned change.
Well-planned change, yes.
Okay, good. Now, Adam, someone quoted me yesterday, but I was actually quoting you when I talked about organisational psychology is about making work not suck. So I picked that up from you. But the question I've got now is, Adam, how do we make work suck less for leaders, particularly middle management, who are looking after others but have nobody looking after them?
That's such an important question. I think middle management is it's got to be one of the hardest jobs in organizations, and there may not be a harder level to be at. One of the challenges in particular that we see really clearly, my colleague Damon Phillips has documented, he calls it middle status conformity. And the basic finding is that at both the bottom and top of organizations, you tend to see more creativity, innovation, and change than you do in the middle. And some of that is because when you're at the bottom, you feel like you have basically nothing to lose, and you also don't know the way we've always done it. And that gives you a little bit of latitude to try different things. When you're at the very top, you're expected to innovate. And you also have less to lose because of the power and status you've accumulated. Whereas in the middle, you've worked really hard to get where you are, and you don't want to fall. And you're facing pressure from above to deliver on a whole bunch of outcomes. And then you've also got to try to manage performance and maintain accountability below you. And so there's this constant squeezing. I think one of the best things you can do as a middle manager to make your own work life suck less is to try to give yourself a little bit of air there. And the easiest way to do that is to go to people who are 1 and 2 levels above you in the hierarchy and describe to them your version of this dilemma. And say, look, one of the things I worry a lot about is that our middle managers, are basically just, trying to deliver results, and they don't have enough time to build relationships, or they're focused just on, hitting targets, and we don't have enough time, to think creatively, and really lead change. I would love your advice about how we could solve that problem. And when you go to people above you and you ask for their advice, a few things tend to happen. One is you flatter them. And a common response is like, wow, Jason, you're a genius. You knew to come to me. 2, they have to walk in your shoes and think about why this challenge might be important. And 3, they tend to give you ideas that they find to be compelling because they came up with them. And for all those reasons, that person above you in the hierarchy then is more likely to be your advocate than your adversary. They might then give you some cover. They might then ask you to make an adjustment to your role that they'll support. They might suggest other people for you to talk to who will have your back. And ultimately, I think that that's probably a conversation worth having if you haven't had it already. One other thing I'll say structurally on this is I studied WL Gore for a while. They make the Gore-Tex fabric on a lot of our cold weather gear. And much of their innovation has come from their attempts to build, instead of a ladder, like a traditional hierarchy, what they call a lattice structure, where it looks like a crisscrossing fence. And the reason they do that is they recognized early on that in most organizations, all it takes is one no to kill an idea. You go to your boss doesn't like it, your idea is dead. If you get past your boss, you still have to go to your boss's boss. And if they don't like it, forget it. And they said, we want to build an organization where all it takes is one yes to save an idea. And so they built a norm in the lattice that anytime you have an idea, you can go to anyone at any role above you, not just in your vertical up the ladder, but you could go to a different department, a different location, a skip level. And if you get one person who's willing to bet on your idea and give it the green light, then you get resources and time and a budget to make it happen. And I think as a middle manager, trying to create that lattice for the people below you is great. That can make their work lives suck less. But also going to the people above you and asking, can we build a little bit more of that lattice structure so that more ideas see the light of day? I think that's a great thing. And I can support that empirically because there's evidence from innovation tournaments where you have contests for people to submit ideas. That one of the best leading indicator of how much value your innovation tournament creates is just the sheer number of ideas you say yes to. The companies that bet on more ideas end up with greater returns.
Again, terrific advice. Lots of notes being taken.
Follow it at your own risk.
All right. So this question says, we often blame burnout on workload, but what about moral injury, meaningless bureaucracy, or cultural double standards? How should leaders respond to these less visible causes?
Yes, and yes. Really, really powerful points. I think that how leaders should respond to all of those forces, for me, has the same starting point, which is, as a leader, there's nothing more important than what Tony Simons and colleagues have called behavioral integrity, which is essentially walking your talk. And too often, leaders think their job is just, all right, I've got to walk the talk, and that means trying to be consistent and practice what I preach. And I think that's backward. I think we should only preach what we already practice. I think we should only talk what we're already walking. What does that look like? I think for leaders, what that means is starting by asking people across levels. You can do this, in conversation. You can do this in survey, depending on the size of the organization. The question I want to ask is, what are the gaps between who we claim to be and who we are on a daily basis? What are the disconnects between what in org psych we would call our espoused values, what we claim is important, and our enacted values, what we actually show is important through our behaviors and our rewards and punishments? And we should be constantly monitoring those gaps to try to figure out where they are and then seeking to close them. And I think that the leaders who make the effort to do that are less likely to be accused of hypocrisy, which is the doublespeak 1984 style that was raised in the question. They're much better at anticipating likely moral injury because they know the places where people might be subjected to undue harm or where people might not get the protection and support that they need. And I think that's got to be an ongoing conversation. This is not an exercise you do as a one-off and say, okay, we're going to do an offsite, and at today's retreat, we're going to be finding out what are all the gaps in our culture. And then once we've surfaced them, our work here is done. No, what you need to do is you need to make that an ongoing effort. It's a little bit like, have you ever trued a bicycle wheel by any chance?
Did you hear that?
We've seen a bicycle.
No?
Bicycle?
bicycle?
Yeah, have you ever straightened out the spokes on the wheel? It's called truing the wheel.
There's some people in the audience like making shapes. So
Okay. Yeah, good. Okay, so for those of you who are uninitiated, I don't know much about bicycles, but what I know is it's a great metaphor for org change, because what you can do is you can take the wheel of a bicycle and spin it. And if you watch it spin from the right angle, you can see the one spoke that's out of alignment. And then you catch it and you straighten it out. And then you spin it again, and now the next most misaligned spoke will be visible, and you straighten that one and you spin it again, and guess what? You are never done. Every time you spin it, having gotten rid of or fixed the spoke that was most out of alignment, you will see then the next most problematic spoke. And I think of leadership as the constant process of truing a bicycle wheel. You got to spin it. You have to take the greatest area of misalignment and try to correct it, and then do it again and again and again.
Sounds exhausting.
I know, I'm so tired all the time. Look, Adam, we ask so much of leaders in organisations, and the emphasis often for them is to use self-care to manage their well-being. How can we better equip and support leaders to do everything we ask of them beyond just asking them to practice better self-care?
This is a tricky one, because pretty quickly self-care becomes another task on the to-do list, and it's easy for it to fall off the to-do list, because rarely is it your most urgent priority, even if you know it's an important one. What do we do about that? I think the best antidote I know of to that problem is to make self-care a collective priority and to hold each other accountable. I think that the best leaders that I've had a chance to work with and observe up close are the ones who say to their teams, I am going to help you set boundaries. It is my job to make sure you're not overextending yourself. It is my responsibility to check in and make sure that you're getting enough time with your family, that your health and your friendships and your hobbies are not casualties of the job that you have. And I would love it if you check in with me on that too. And I think that it's the kind of thing that like we were just talking about with leadership, in the change context, has to be monitored on an ongoing basis, because it's too easy to let it slip. And so I guess the simple answer to this question, if there is one, is to say, we're good at accountability when it comes to performance and results. What if we took those same accountability practices and applied them to well-being?
All right, next question. How do we improve the work design for frontline workers, manufacturing operators, construction labourers, etc.? They have a specific job to do in a process. Autonomy and choice of work are not available.
Oh, I beg to differ on that one. There's a great experiment actually led by Toby Wall over a number of years. This was in manufacturing, looking at the introduction of advanced manufacturing technology. So imagine that you're doing your job on an assembly line, and now there are machines that can do parts of your work. The question is, what do we do when that advanced technology is being introduced? And in the experiment, one of the ideas the researchers had, led by Toby, was, what if we get the technology operators to have a little bit of more autonomy and control, so that they're in charge of their own workflow, as opposed to letting it be just managed by the people above them? And what you see in the data is that authority and responsibility to shape how their own work unfolds ends up reducing the amount of downtime that machines have. Why? Well, when you're given that control and that sense of responsibility, when a machine goes down, you feel like it's your job, instead of saying, that's not my job, to go and troubleshoot and figure out what caused the machine to go offline. And then you're able to build some of the skills to repair it. And the machine gets online sooner. And that's, that's a win for you, because you're gaining a sense of competence and contribution. And it's a win for the organization, because you're getting better results. And then Toby and his colleagues go and feed this research evidence back to the manufacturing teams. And they say, but that's not what's happening. There's something else that's going on. And so they go back and gather more data. And it turns out that when the operators are given this control and autonomy, they not only figure out how to repair faults, they also begin to figure out what's causing them in the first place. And they're preventing them in addition to fixing them more quickly. And that ends up paying even greater dividends to the company than they realized to begin with. So look, I don't think autonomy looks the same in every job. I don't think we can always give people total discretion about when they work or how they work or who they work with or what decisions they make. But there are opportunities for people to make choices and have control in every line of work. And I think the beginning of creating those opportunities is realizing that they exist. And I don't know what that looks like, in any given context, right? I'm a generalist, not a specialist in particular kinds of work. But I think if you look hard for them and ask people, what would they like to have a little bit more say in? Where would they like to have more control and more discretion? You will find them.
Yep. So looking at the micro factors in the job and where we have those opportunities to provide that, yeah.
Yeah, that was much more succinct than my response. Well done.
Adam, this will be the last audience question, and then we'll go into our final two questions that we ask everyone at the end of our podcast. So you said empirical evidence confirms that a few bad apples make workplace cultures toxic. Yet many commentators say a toxic workplace results from the systems, not just the bad apples. So what's right?
Well, this seems like a paradox, but let's think about it this way. The systems are created by people. And generally speaking, the systems are created by a small number of people in power. So what I worry about the most in organizations is people in positions of either founder or CEO who have what are called dark triad traits in psychology. Those who don't know the dark triad, it is narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. And guess what? All it takes is one founder or CEO who has a giant ego, who enjoys manipulating other people for personal gain, and feels no concern about hurting other people, to create a broken system that then both builds and perpetuates a toxic culture. And I think that is, I guess that's how I'd reconcile those two perspectives. As my colleague Ben Schneider put it years ago, the people make the place, and particular people have a disproportionate impact on making the place.
Yeah, we probably couldn't have asked for a better segue into David's and Kanae's session next.
Yep.
They'll be talking about that exact issue around how people create systems, and if you want to have inclusive cultures, then you need to involve more people, right? So, all right, well, Adam, the question we like to ask all our guests at the end of our podcasts, first of all, I'll ask the first one, Joelle will ask the last one. What are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
I think my biggest hope for the future of workplace mental health is that it's seen as, I hope that in the future, mental health at work is seen as a strategic imperative. That it's not just a nice to have, but it's actually vital to long-term success. I think the more leaders that recognize that, the better. And I think the data are already there. Alex Edmonds has a great long-term study showing that if you just look at the Fortune 100 best places to work, if you had invested in those a couple of decades ago, you would have outperformed the stock market. We see that that investing in people pays dividends over time, and I think that we need leaders to recognize that. We are long overdue for leaders to recognize that.
Okay, final question for you today, Adam. Do you have any parting words of advice for professionals who want to work in the field of psychological health and safety or workplace mental health?
I think actually my best advice is to make the case for the importance of the work we do a little bit differently than how I instinctively did it for a long time. I thought my job was to take the best evidence from randomized controlled experiments and longitudinal studies and basically browbeat leaders with it. But here are the most rigorous data points. You must see the light. And the truth is that very few leaders change their minds when you preach at them and try to serve them the Kool-Aid that you just drank, or when you prosecute them and try to decimate their worldviews. I think what's much more effective is to do a version of what counseling psychologists call motivational interviewing, where you sit down with the leaders that you're hoping to influence and you try to understand their own motivations for change and help them find reasons for change that appeal to them. And so that's the art of asking questions and engaging in active listening, much more than it is, assertive persuasion. It's sitting down with people and saying, what are your concerns about employees' mental health and well-being? And have you thought about how that might jeopardize your ability to achieve your goals? And then, based on how they respond, being willing to work with them and meet them where they are, as opposed to trying to drag them to where you are. And I think if you can adopt that motivational interviewing stance, you will both be more successful and also less adversarial.
Consistent with some of the themes that came up yesterday as well. Yep.
Yeah, I've spent the last week and a half with Marianne Bainton, the godmother of Psych, Health and Safety from Canada, soon to be your 51st state, I believe, in the US. And she, no?
I hope not.
I don't think that will happen. But that's her words of advice as well around meeting leaders where they're at. Don't try and sell them on the benefits of workplace mental health. Understand the business problems that they're trying to overcome and then solve it without using technical jargon or longitudinal studies. Yeah.
Unless, of course, they love evidence. But I will say, I think you just hit on something really important there, Jason, which is I think that very often our impulse is to talk about all the benefits of investing in mental health. But leaders already see benefits of making the investments they've committed to. And sometimes the best way to get them to budge a little bit is not to talk about all the good things that will happen if they change. It's to remind them of the bad things that will happen if they don't change. I've gotten much more traction by talking about the cost of burnout than I have the dividends of mental health. And so I think just getting them to think a little bit about what might go wrong if you neglect mental health and well-being is a great place to start this conversation.
And we've definitely found that's the case in Australia with regulations now in place. It's not just the carrot anymore. There is now a stick, and people can see there's, financial, legal, reputational risks if they don't do it right. So, yeah. Adam, despite the AV challenges that we started today with, I think that's been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your patience while we got everything going, and thank you so much for your wisdom that you're able to share with the audience today.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Psych, Health and Safety Podcast. You can catch this episode early in 2026 on Spotify and Apple and wherever you listen to podcasts. Really great that Adam finally came on after all these years. So we did it.
After all these years of us just passively manifesting, yeah.
Yeah, it worked. But that's it for this podcast episode.
You've been listening to the Psych, Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych, Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychhealthandsafety.com.